I used to believe Trois-Rivières was the kind of place where ghosts only lived in old guidebooks and tourist legends. History hung everywhere in the narrow streets and cracked facades, but it felt harmless, distant, like faded handwriting in an old journal. That illusion broke the winter we decided to trespass into a part of the past that wasn't meant to be disturbed. It started with Marianne. She had an uncle who'd passed away the year before, a historian who spent his retirement digging through old municipal archives, collecting stories about local folklore. When he died, his house in Cap-de-la-Madeleine was left untouched for months, the furniture stiff with dust, the windows tightly shuttered against the cold. When the family finally cleared it out, Marianne came across an old leather-bound notebook, the pages brittle with age, filled with descriptions of half-forgotten ceremonies, local superstitions, and cryptic sketches of strange, looping symbols. There was one entry that caught her attention. It mentioned a small, overgrown plot behind the Église de Sainte-Marie-Madeleine cemetery, a piece of land that had supposedly been used by settlers in the 18th century for rituals meant to protect the town against illness and invasion. The details were sparse, but the entry suggested the rites weren't entirely Catholic, a hybrid of folk practices and something older, unnamed. We were curious. Curiosity is always the first mistake. The five of us, me, Marianne, Simon, Mark and Elise, planned a late-night visit, walking past the empty streets and snow-choked sidewalks of the old quarter, crossing the frozen stretch of Boulevard des Forges toward Cap-de-la-Madeleine. The church stood quiet and solemn under the pale orange wash of streetlights, its stone facade frosted white by the cold. The cemetery behind it stretched longer than I'd expected, rows of crooked headstones and half-sunken crosses poking out from patches of untouched snow. At the far end, where the property sloped toward the woods, we found the plot. There were no headstones, only a circle of weathered stones arranged with uncanny precision, almost perfectly intact despite the centuries. The ground inside the ring was bare, as if even the snow had been reluctant to settle there. Marianne had brought her uncle's notebook. She flipped to the page describing the ritual, her breath hanging in the air like smoke. The instructions were vague. Light 5 candles, one at each cardinal point, with the 5th placed at the centre. Stand in silence until the air shifts. We followed the directions, more for the thrill than out of belief. The snow around us muffled every sound, the world shrinking until only the circle and the dark sky above seemed to exist. When the last candle was lit, the change was immediate. The air grew heavy, sharp and metallic in my throat, and the silence deepened until I could hear my own heartbeat. A distant sound broke the stillness, not the wind, but a low rhythmic rustling like dry leaves dragging against stone. The shadows beyond the circle shifted, bending unnaturally, stretching long fingers across the snow. The flames on the candles stood perfectly still, unaffected by the breeze. The cold pressed harder, sinking through our coats, our bones, until it felt like we were standing underwater, lungs struggling to draw breath. Elise was the first to break the circle, staggering backward, her face pale and drenched in sweat. The moment her foot crossed the stones, the candle flames flickered out all at once, leaving us blind and disoriented under the dark, starlit sky. That night was the beginning. The days that followed spiraled into a blur of fear and confusion. Each of us experienced the same symptoms: overwhelming fatigue, vivid and disturbing dreams, and, most unsettling, the faint smell of soil and smoke clinging to our clothes and skin, no matter how often we washed. Simon found deep scratches along the wooden frame of his bedroom window, marks that hadn't been there the night before. Elise discovered dark bruises on her ribs, circular and evenly spaced, like the pressure points of unseen hands. Mark stopped answering calls altogether, retreating into his apartment, where his neighbours reported strange noises at all hours, dragging sounds, low muttering, the occasional burst of frantic knocking against the walls. I wasn't spared either. I woke up night after night at exactly 3:07 a.m., heart pounding, the room submerged in cold so deep it left frost on the inside of the windows. The scent of earth was strongest then, as though the ground beneath the apartment had opened up, something reaching from below. We learned quickly that the cemetery was only part of the story. The notebook's later pages hinted at something more sinister. The ritual wasn't one of protection, but of invitation. A forgotten practice rooted in early settler fears of the wilderness, of old spirits that predated the town itself, entities that had lingered in the soil long before the church was ever built. The final entry was barely legible, the ink smudged and water-streaked. But one thing stood out, the name of the entity they had called, Les Veilleurs, the Watchers. Whatever we had disturbed wasn't content to haunt a graveyard. It had followed us home. Mark was the first to be hospitalized. His roommate found him unconscious on the kitchen floor, the skin around his mouth blue, as if he'd been suffocating in his sleep. His lungs were clear. The doctors couldn't explain it. Elise started fainting at random, once in class, another time in the shower, waking disoriented and confused, always smelling of soil. Simon developed an infection in his right eye that left him half blind for weeks, the doctors baffled by the absence of any physical injury. Marianne withdrew completely, poring over her uncle's notes, cross-referencing books from the university library, trying to piece together a way to undo what we'd started. The notes mentioned only one thing. The stones in the circle weren't meant to be disturbed, and lighting the candles bound you to the ritual until you closed the path. But we had never closed it. The final attempt was born out of desperation. Marianne arranged for all of us to return to the cemetery, the snow now thawing under the bitter early spring sun, the ground soft and damp. The stone circle had changed. The stones were no longer dry and weathered but slick, as if coated in some dark resin, and the ground inside the ring seemed to pulse, like the earth itself was breathing. We didn't light candles this time. We stood in silence, waiting for the same shift in the air, hoping to reverse whatever we'd set in motion. But the air never shifted. The only thing that changed was the sky. The stars above the circle seemed to dim, as if something massive and unseen was hovering just out of reach. A deep vibration passed through the earth, subtle but enough to make our teeth chatter. Marianne collapsed onto her knees, clutching her chest, her breath shallow and quick. Simon's nose bled freely, the dark streaks soaking into his scarf. We left before the sun rose. The path wasn't closed. I don't know what we let loose that winter, or if it ever truly left. Mark recovered physically, but the last time I saw him, his hair had turned almost completely grey, and he refused to step foot anywhere near Cap-de-la-Madeleine. Elise moved back to Montreal, and I lost touch with her not long after. Simon quit university entirely, left Trois-Rivières, and hasn't been heard from since. I still see Marianne occasionally, though both of us avoid speaking about it. She keeps the notebook locked in a fireproof safe now, not because it might burn, but because it might not. The smell of earth never fully left my apartment. Some nights it curls in around the windows, faint but unmistakable, as if the ground remembers. I stopped thinking of Trois-Rivières as a city with history. History suggests the past is finished, but I've learned that here, the past waits.